Before we get into that, just quick introductions. I'm Max Shaw, CEO of Windmill. Nicole, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I'm Nicole. I'm head of growth here at Windmill.
Awesome. And I wanted I know everyone's interested in AI and is always asking what tools and workflows and how do you get more productive. And so throughout the presentation, I'm going to kind of pepper in a bunch of different things that I use every day in order to kind of optimize my workflows. To prepare this presentation, a few things to call out. Nicole and I had a meeting about a week ago. We used Granola to record that entire meeting, which is a really helpful transcript. I then used this app called Whisper Flow and Whisper Memo. There's one's for the desktop, one's for the mobile. They're both pretty much the same. They allow you to use your voice and turn that into text, which I find really helpful and is a lot faster than typing. I then put a lot of that stuff into Claude Code, and then we had Claude Code actually create these slides in Google Slides. And so these are some of the different tools I'm using every day, and I'll actually show a few of them live as we go. Windmill is our core product is AI performance reviews. And so this is built out of frustration I had previously. I ran product at a company called Yext in New York City. And I remember sitting down to write a performance review, and you just start with this blank sheet of paper with like 10 questions, and you just have to fill it all out from memory. And this felt really broken to me. And so this is what caused me to leave Yext and start Windmill. And the thing we do is AI performance reviews. And not only are we able to make them much faster, so a traditional manager review usually takes a few hours. We're able to take it down to about 6 minutes. But more importantly, we're actually able to increase the quality of those reviews because we're using AI to gather all the right context. And I'll certainly talk more about how that all works. And what that means is that employees actually prefer, so we poll every single employee after running a performance review. 93% of employees prefer AI performance reviews over completely manual reviews. And that's because not only are they faster, but they're much more accurate. We have four key things we want to cover today. First, I added a topic as of last week because Claude Anthropic announced the HR plugin, and I want to talk through what it is and how it works. I want to talk about why context is the most important thing everyone should be focused on, when to use AI, and importantly, when to not, and then how can you drive AI adoption across your company. So let's start with this HR plugin from Claude. I assume most people saw this. Has anyone used, if you just ask a question, has anyone used this today? I'm curious. Based on my read is a lot of people saw it and they think it sounds really cool, but they don't actually know what it is. So I'll show you what it is in a second. Before that, I wanted to give a quick background about context because I do think this is one of the most important things that everyone should understand. So here I am in ChatGPT. This is a completely anonymous account. And if I ask a question like, what should I talk about on the webinar today? So that was Whisper Flow. That just allowed me to do that, if you're curious. And this is what it gives me. Hook, introduce yourself, core content. This is not very helpful at all, right? How is this going to help me plan for a webinar? And of course, for anyone who uses AI, the reason this isn't helpful, it doesn't know anything about me, it doesn't know anything about the company, and there's no context in order to answer this question. And so that's really the first thing that I want to quickly touch on is why context is so important. If you don't give AI the right context, it can't be helpful. All of these models are extremely intelligent, right? They're solving biology and physics problems and math Olympiads. They're plenty intelligent to help you with a lot of your day-to-day HR workflows. The issue is you need to feed in the right context. And so behind the scenes, just like getting a little technical for a second, is when you ask a basic prompt like that, what actually gets sent to the model is something like this, right? Where there's the user prompt, what should I talk about in the webinar today? And then there's the system prompt. You're an AI chatbot built by OpenAI. And so this is if I ask a question like, who are you? It knows who it is, right? That's what happened in that workflow right there. But that's not what I need. I need a lot more information. And so if I go back and let's start a new chat, and I say, I'm the CEO of Windmill. My name is Max Shaw. What should I talk about on the webinar today? And then I say, here is my website. And it's going to search the web. So it's going to use a tool. And it's going to talk about things that are much more helpful. The power of AI and modern performance management, why traditional performance reviews fail, right? Now, all of a sudden, this is the same model, the same intelligence. I just gave it a little bit more context, and it's 1,000 times more useful. And so for all of your workflows, this is the core thing you're going to think about, right? And a traditional like full chatbot usually looks something like this, where you have a system prompt, you have memory, you have tools, you have user prompts. And so all this feeds together to deliver that optimal experience. And so that leads into the Claude HR plugin and what it actually is. So I'm sure a bunch of people saw this. Anthropic launched a series of connectors and plugins. So what does that mean? What is this actually, right? Here's the page on Anthropic's website. You can do performance views, do comp analysis, you can do onboarding. All it is really actually just a set of prompts. It's actually pretty simple when you dive into it. And so this is a GitHub repo. This is what engineers use to code, but it won't be that intimidating, I promise. Here are the different knowledge work plugins. Here is the human resources plugin. And it's just a collection of files, right? So you think about it as just a collection of files. There's some connectors, there's a README. But the core thing we want to look at today are the skills and the commands. So here are the skills: compensation, benchmarking, handbook, a bunch more. And here are the commands, right? And so let's jump into one of these: draft offer.md. MD is a markdown, which is basically just a text file, if you're not familiar. And this is what's in this file. So the purpose of this skill is to draft an offer letter with comp details. And here it is. And so what you can see, all this is actually just a prompt. And it's actually not that long of a prompt. It's basically saying, hey, here are the things I need, and here's the output of the letter. And if I just copy this, and I literally just put this into ChatGPT, this is all the plugin is doing, and I click enter, it's going to write that offer letter, right? Now, it doesn't know anything about the offer letter, so it's not that useful, but you can see it put it in the format that you wanted, right? And so that's all this plugin is just a series of prompts that you can feed in. So, right, this is like what the context looks like. This new HR plugin just adds this offer letter skill. Now, this copy and pasting is a little bit tedious, right? So if I go into Claude, I'm in Claude right now. This is the desktop app. There's chat, cowork, and code. I'm in cowork. Again, this is also confusing, multiple different things. And if I go to customize, this is where you can install plugins. So you can see I've installed the human resources plugin. To add a new plugin, I do browse plugins. Here are the ones I've human resources installed. Here are the other ones. And they have the commands and the skills, and for all purposes, these are basically the exact same thing. And if I go into the draft offer, this is the same thing I just saw. It's the same text. And the nice thing is in Claude Cowork, I can just do draft. I can do this slash command. So I'm clicking backslash. I can go to connectors or plugins, and I go plugins, human resources. Here they all are. Or I could just do slash draft offer. And then I could say, let's just give it a little bit more specifics. I want an offer for Michael Scott, who's the CEO of Dunder Mifflin. He's starting in 2 weeks. He's going to make $2 million a year. Sure. Right. And send that in. And again, this would be the exact same thing as just sending that prompt in alongside of this message. There's nothing magical about this plugin. It just helps you prompts. That's all that's there. Now, the other plugin I want to talk about, or sorry, the other skill I want to talk about is the performance review one, right? This is relevant to what we do. And again, this is just a prompt. Here we see all the information. Here's an example self-assessment template. So it's saying to do key accomplishments, goals review, manager review, blah, blah, blah. Again, we'll do the same thing. I'm just going to copy and paste it in just to show you that there's nothing magical happening under the hood. This is the Claude performance view thing that people have been talking about. And if we ask this, so now it's going to ask me some questions. It doesn't actually know what I want. Let's say I want to do a manager review about Nicole Alonso. And so now it wrote the review of Nicole. Now, if you look at this, you'll quickly see this is not that helpful because it has no context about who Nicole is, right? And so it's actually just created a template. It doesn't actually know anything, right? And so if you hooked up some tools or if you manually copied and pasted a bunch of information into here, it could do a better job drafting this. But that's kind of why I started with context. It's only as good as the information you feed in. And what we've built at Windmill is a system that systematically collects all the relevant context you need in order to do cool things like this, helping write performance reviews. So I'm going to jump back to the presentation, and I'll pause there just in case there are any questions. Let me just see on the Claude plugin. I'm quickly going to check Q&A. Which version of Claude is this? I was using Opus 4.6 is the model. Um, let's see, people analytics. Okay. Any other questions? Let me know. So let's jump into if you want to use AI for performance views. As I've talked about, context is the most important thing. So what is the right context you need? So as you can see, I'm a big fan of The Office. This is Michael Scott. Technically, this is Prison Mike for anyone who watches the show. Let's say he's a designer at Dunder Mifflin and you're his new manager. You just joined the company yesterday and your job is to write a performance review for Mike. How would you do that? You're going to need the context to be able to do that, right? And so what are the key pieces of context you need? The first is you're going to want to figure out what has Michael been up to. And the easiest place to start here is by looking in the systems most of the time, like we're talking about knowledge workers, most of them are working online most of the time. And so if you're the design manager, you're probably going to start in Figma and see, hey, what has Michael designed over the last 6 months? You're probably going to go Figma by Figma, see all the little things. You're then probably also going to see like, hey, has he been committing any code? Designers increasingly commit code. I'll check GitHub. Has he written any Google Docs? Has he written anything in Notion? You're also going to want to check communication and meetings, right? Who's he been meeting with? What is he meeting about? Are there any meeting transcripts? Increasingly, meeting transcripts are really valuable. And the reason why everyone's recording all these meetings is so you can feed it into AI as context. What's he doing in Slack? What are his communication patterns? Who is he working with, right? So this is all stuff that you can just figure out by looking through the data. And it always frustrated me so much when a manager would ask me a question they could have otherwise figured out. Once I became a manager, I realized the issue is you just have no time in the day. But AI is really good at looking through all these things. So if you feed in all this stuff, you connect it, you copy stuff in, you can really get a good baseline of like what he's been up to. But that's not the full story. You also need to understand how is he doing? And one of the best ways to figure this out is what do other people think about the work he's doing? And there's a lot of different places you can do this. One hidden gem I'd mention is if you're using a tool like Figma or if engineers are in GitHub, there's often a lot of feedback that's already flowing, right? So in Figma, you have all of the comments that are feeding into Figma. And often those are like questions from engineers being like, hey, I'm confused about this mock, or maybe a researcher is saying something like, hey, I don't understand how this works, right? That's super helpful. So if you want to feed all the right stuff into AI, you better get all the comments from Figma, all the comments from Google Docs, right? That's a really good way to get feedback. The other one I'll quickly highlight on is continuous feedback. I know this has been kind of the holy grail of HR for a while is, hey, how do we get people to give feedback in the moment, not at the end of the performance review cycle? This is really hard. And this is actually one of the first things we cracked here at Windmill, where we have an agent that actually goes out and based off of organizational network analysis, based off of who's working together, it asks them a question. So after this webinar, Wendy, our agent, might reach out to Nicole and say something like, hey, Nicole, how did Max do preparing for the webinar? Or it might reach out to me and say, hey, Max, how could have Nicole have been more helpful in the webinar prep, right? And these little questions throughout the period about the work itself is really helpful context. And importantly, you want to capture it in the moment. People have terrible memories. And if you wait, and everyone knows this, probably listening, if you wait for the performance review cycle to start thinking about it, you're going to forget everything. I can barely remember what I did last week. Remembering what Nicole did 3 months ago is impossible. 101s is the final thing I'll highlight here. Really critical that if they're not recorded, you're writing down the action items. And then private notes is another really critical one where if you spot something, make sure you write it down somewhere. We make that super easy in Windmill, but if you're not using Windmill, put it in like an Apple Note or a Google Doc, put it somewhere so you don't forget. The final key piece is expectations. And this is an area I think a lot of people often overlook. Let's say we're taking this designer example. If Michael is an entry-level designer versus he is the head of design, the expectations are going to look entirely different, right? Let's say Michael didn't conduct any user interviews over the last 6 months. Now, is that important? The answer is it depends, right? Is he supposed to be conducting user interviews? Is this something that's part of his job description? Was this something that was highlighted last performance review cycle as the most important thing to focus on? Or is this something that there's an entirely other team that's focused on, right? So you need to have this context if you want AI to be helpful in this kind of stuff. And this includes things like the role description, leveling docs, company values, individual goals, specific responsibilities, all these different pieces. Now, if you feed all of this information, if you collect it, and you got to collect it throughout the cycle, right? It's not enough to do it at the end. Collect it throughout the cycle, and then you feed it all into AI. AI actually can be pretty helpful. And this is why we're able to take it from like a few hours down to 6 minutes, is because we do all this automatically throughout the cycle and no one has to think about it. So if you've collected all this context, how can you use AI in performance reviews? And I think there's some specific areas where AI excels and some specific areas where I'd recommend not using AI. So what is AI good for? AI is really good about reasoning over massive amounts of data. So for example, if you're thinking about an engineer and you want to read every commit they wrote for the last 6 months, no manager is ever going to do that. That's an insane ask. But for AI, that is extremely easy, right? So if you collect all the information, AI is really good about reasoning over it, making sure you didn't miss anything, catching hidden biases. And it's also helpful for kind of generating first drafts if you feed in the right context. Now, where I would not use AI, and I would definitely stay away from, and this is how we designed our product, you should not use AI for deciding the final ratings. Not only is kind of, I don't think the intelligence is there, you're never going to have 100% context with Windmill. Maybe we get to you to like 90, 95%. You're never going to get to 100%. But more importantly, you need to have accountability in the system, right? And so if a manager just says, hey, I don't know that rating, AI made it up, right? That will totally erode trust across the entire organization. Managers need to own the output, right? They're using AI to help them, but they need to own the output. So you never want to use it for deciding final ratings. There's also legal issues for New York City. There's local law specifically about this kind of stuff. So you got to be careful. Replacing manager's judgment, right? This is still the job of the manager. The AI should help you find all the information, not to be the judger. And then also, of course, talking through reviews with employees. Hopefully that's kind of obvious, but managers should be delivering these reviews. So let's jump into a quick live demo. Here are some of the flows we've designed that try to mirror AI and managers in kind of a nice user experience. So I'm going to start with our performance review product. So this is the flow that a manager goes through. So this is a demo account, but in this demo account, I am Austin's manager, right? And so it's a three-step process. The first thing you see is this summary report. So the first thing we do is we have our agent look through all the context we have and generate a summary so that the manager can get up to speed on what Austin's been working on. We see things like key contributors. He built our 101s feature. You can see that here. You can see some praise and recognition. And so a lot of this is pulling from like GitHub and Linear. It just knows he built the 101 feature because we see all the tickets, right? Here's some praise and recognition. Here's some constructive feedback that was identified. And this data is slightly sparse because it is a demo account, but you can start to see the power of this. Here's what was discussed in 101s. Any notable accomplishments. Here's what he said in his self-review. Here's what he said in his peer review, right? So all this different information, I can read over it, get up to speed. The next is what we call observations. So this is where we start to see the key questions that are being asked, key accomplishments, area for development, core values, and these ratings. These are not pre-filled. This was just a demo artifact. Of course, these questions are totally customizable. This is just a sample template in there. But the cool thing we do is this concept called observations. So let's say I want to highlight the key accomplishments for Austin. I click add account. Let me just clear this out. Sorry. I click add accomplishments, right? Add observations. And we see a list of observations that our agent has suggested might be applicable. They're not saying it's 100%, but this is saying, hey, this is something you might want to highlight. And you can see where it comes from, right? So this comes from the system, the peer review, and the self-review. And we also see Linear as well as a data source here. And so if I agree with this observation, I can click add. And now it's in the performance review as a key observation. Maybe I don't agree with this, right? So I'm not going to add that. I don't agree with that, but I like this one, right? A peer mentioned this. I actually think this is important to highlight. And you can start to see how you can quickly go through a flow. This is so much faster than starting with that blank sheet of paper. I kind of think about it as turning it from like the SAT, like the essay portion to like the multiple choice. I always found the multiple choice much easier. And we kind of turn this into like a multiple choice quiz. Importantly, the manager is still control about everything that gets put into this review. And of course, you can add custom observations as well. We then have the ratings, which are totally up to the manager. And this is where you want the manager spending actually their time. This is the valuable stuff, not reading all the GitHub commits. It is thinking, are they a 3 or are they a 4 or are they a 5? Because these decisions have real consequences and managers need to stand by these. So that is our manager flow. That's just one example. of how we use AI and how, because our system is constantly collecting all that context, we're able to do a really good job with this. Another example is calibrations. So this is after the performance review process. We have a calibration system, right? You can drag stuff around, pretty standard stuff. I can add reasons for why stuff changed. But this pre-read is kind of the exciting part where we use AI to help focus the calibration meeting. This is a kind of meeting that, if for anyone, I'm sure probably have been part of these can often go way off track really quickly, where you start you don't want to discuss every single rating for every single person. That's not the purpose. Most of the ratings are there's probably pretty good alignment across the committee around, hey, these all make sense. Everyone's on board. There's probably a few key areas you want to focus on. And so this pre-read tries to identify those areas. And so what it does is actually reads all the performance reviews, and then it looks through all the other context it has, and then it looks at the ratings, right, and makes sure everything lines up. This is meant to kind of avoid any biases that might creep in, to make sure if different managers think about a 4 versus 5 differently, it's going to highlight it here, right? And so this pre-read gets sent to everyone a few days in advance of the calibration meeting to try to get them up to speed. And this helps. So this is where I was talking about kind of like the manager ratings to see if there's discrepancies. And we'll just try to pull in anything to keep this meeting a lot more focused. So those are just 2 examples, manager reviews and calibration. There's a bunch more in the product. I'm not going to do a full product demo today, but you can start to see how having all this context is extremely powerful. Okay. The final thing I wanted to talk through, and then we'll open it up to questions, is measuring and driving AI adoption. Most CEOs I talk to, most HR leaders, most COOs, most CFOs, a lot of them all have the same goal this year. It is to drive more AI adoption. They want every single employee getting really good at AI. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about AI is that it's easy to use. Like, oh, AI just does it all for you, so it's super easy. Using AI effectively is a skill, right? Understanding how to feed in the right context, how to feed in the right prompt, which models are good at which things, right? All of that is a skill, and there is a learning curve. And if you think that just AI is just something that you just got to try it once and it's going to click, I haven't found that to be the case. There is a learning curve, and you need a system across your company for measuring AI adoption and then driving it, right? And so on the measurement side, there's a lot of different ways you can look at telemetry to see where are people using AI, and I'll show a few examples. You're also going to want some lightweight way of quickly getting a pulse of everyone at the organization. This stuff is changing extremely quickly almost on a daily or weekly basis. So you're going to want to be constantly checking in with the team in different ways so that you stay up to speed around what's working and what's not, and how can I unblock you. That's on the measurement side, right? Are people even trying AI? If they're not even using AI, there's no way it can be effective. And I know so many CEOs who bought these AI tools last year and they're not seeing ROI. Probably a big reason, one, is that maybe the tools aren't that good, but also 2, people aren't even using them, right? So you got to measure that. On the other side, you got to drive adoption, right? And so this is critical things about how do you recognize the people who are using AI in the best ways. Sharing of use cases is extremely valuable. We do lunch and learns every single week where people showcase cool new AI use cases. A lot of people don't know how to use it, right? They're like, oh, AI seems cool. Everyone says I got to use it. I don't know what to do, right? How do I use this in my workflow? One-on-ones, if you're using one-on-ones as a cool tool for management, every one-on-one, your managers better be checking about AI, right? And there's different forms of how that question should look for, but this better be a continuous conversation. Performance review is actually the easiest. If AI is the top AI adoption or excellence or whatever, however you want to frame it, if that's the top goal for the company, it better be in the actual performance review itself. Managers better be reviewing and rating employees about, hey, are you doing a good job adopting AI? There's no better way to drive performance than to put it as a core part of the performance review process and potentially even tie compensation to it. I know Shopify was extremely early here. I think they did last year, but we've seen basically every other major company starting to use AI for both helping run performance reviews, but then also AI is a criteria in the performance reviews themselves. So let me show you a few examples. Telemetry. This is all still kind of new. So I expect actually this year a lot of the stuff to get a lot better. And we're actually doing a lot of things at Windmill to make this super easy to track across the organization. If you're using ChatGPT Enterprise, they have user analytics. It's only on ChatGPT Enterprise, which is super annoying, at least as far as I know. But you can see who's actually using AI, right? And I think there's pretty high correlation to the people who are using AI a lot and the people who are using it well, right? I don't think you should be too worried about, hey, this person's using AI a ton, but they're not doing a good job of that. You got to be careful about like some AI slop, and I talk about it in the white paper a little bit. But I think right now, just focus on everyone using AI as much as possible is what you should really be focused on. In Claude, there's also some. Their app is currently down right now. They've been having a lot of downtime recently. But you can track team usage across Cowork and across Claude Code. It's not amazing, but it's starting to get better. So there is a way to do this in Claude as well. If you have engineers using a tool like Cursor, um, you can, there's some stats here, right? And I think pretty much every AI tool will have some sort of usage stats. And so you should be downloading them all, combining them all together to try to get a full picture around which tools are being used, which are not, and then how is that changing over time. We actually have a stats feature inside of Windmill. So we're going to actually start pulling in a lot of those stats as well. Here's like meeting times, PRs, merge, just looking across the company. This I just put this together this morning, and this stood out to me. ADIO is our CRM, and you see notes created, and Ben, our go-to-market engineer, has created 89 notes over the last few months. It's kind of a good amount of notes. And so I drilled in, and this is the graph, which is interesting. Basically zero until 2 weeks ago. And this was not because Ben just started working really hard. What Ben did is he set up an agent that automatically creates a note for every single account every single week. And that's why you see that here, right? And so you start to see how these notes are automatically getting generated automatically, and that's getting attributed to Ben, right? So as you look across stats and telemetry, in a lot of cases, you might see output increase a ton. It doesn't mean people are working harder. It often could mean that they're starting to use AI to do more of their stuff, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say this is a sign that this is good or bad, but you better be measuring this kind of stuff. You could see like a ton more Slack messages get sent out from someone because now they have their Claude agent sending out tons of Slack messages. That will happen. So as you look through these numbers, just be careful about that. It's not a bad thing or necessarily a good thing, but it's something you got to be aware of. So the telemetry, you want to get as much data as you can. It's not going to tell the full story though. So you're going to want to be doing lightweight touch points. I would call them these pulse checks. Probably on a weekly basis with the team. We actually make that so you could just like send a Slack message to the team and say, hey, what's a cool workflow in AI this week? We have a feature that's specifically built around this called Pulse. And so what this does is every single week at Friday at 3 p.m., Wendy is going to reach out to everyone at the company or whoever you decide with these questions, right? It has 4 questions. This is what it looks like in Slack, if people are curious. You can see on the right-hand side here. And Wendy reached out on Friday and asked me some questions. And I quickly went back and forth. I did use voice for this, whisper flow to kind of get it out there really quickly. And I sent those responses in. And then, of course, you can read these one by one. But we generate a summary each week, right? And so you have themes, you have key findings, you can drill in everything cited. And then critically, you have the suggested action items. And right here, you see Wendy's suggesting integrations. Hardware for engineers actually increasingly becoming a bottleneck because they're running all these agents all at once. Nicole mentioned some stuff about how the recent lunch and learn was helpful. That's great. If I go to, here's another one that's just engineering specific. We've been running this week over week, right? So you can start to see how things are changing. People like Opus as the most preferred model. And this is just always running. I never need to think about this, right? I used to like send these like Slack messages and try to remember to remind people to respond. Wendy handles all of this for you. It automatically nudges people to try to maximize response rates, all of that kind of good stuff. And then once you start to collect this data, you can do some cool things like ask questions across it, right? So here I'm using AI to help me figure out how to drive AI adoption. So I actually asked Wendy right before this, based on what you know about the team, what would be some recommendations you have to improve AI adoption? And it says adoption is strong but uneven. Engineering has deep workflows, non-technical roles showing some creative adoption. And I actually agree with this. I think we've started up level the rest of the team recently, which has been great. So you're starting to see that. Engineers are complaining about they want more RAM, consolidating tools, MCP, all sorts of different stuff. Lunch and learns I find is an extremely helpful skill. just sharing what works, what doesn't, right? So you start to see how automatically asking these questions, especially right now where so much is changing, I would highly recommend asking these questions at least once a week. Keep it super lightweight though. No one wants to fill out a massive survey. Just ask one or two questions in Slack or whatever you use. Obviously, Windmill can help, but you can do this on your own. But keep it lightweight. It's much more important to get super high level thought or super kind of thoughts each week rather than like filling out like 20 questions. Or some people like try to have like a complicated rating scale and like show because they want to show a graph to the CEO. That's like cool, but it's not really going to drive it. What you really want to know is what's blocking people from doing more? Are people trying it? And how can we help? So there's a bunch more in the white paper of information that we will send out at the conclusion of this webinar. We have about 10 minutes left. And so I wanted to open it up for some questions about anything I talked about or about anything else that people are curious about.
Yeah, Max, I think we have a couple great ones in the chat here that would be amazing to answer live.
Yeah. All right. I just need my Celsius. Okay. So there's a few questions about calibration. So I'll bring that back up. Can you edit the pre-read output before sending it out? Was a question. So the way this works is 2 days in advance, our agent sends out the pre-read, right? And so this is fully AI generated. But then what happens is anyone on the committee, right, which are the people in the meeting, respond to that Slack message, which with what they specifically want to talk about. So they can say, "Hey, I specifically want to talk about Brian's my co-founder. I want to specifically talk about Brian in this calibration." And so you kind of get it's not like they're editing this document. This document is step one. Step two is everyone on the committee chimes in with what they want to talk about. And then at the end, Wendy takes that document plus what everyone wants to talk about and creates an agenda kind of for the calibration that is then sent to the facilitator. Another question. Yeah, can you use the calibration output as the agenda for the meeting? Yeah, that's exactly what it's built for. And it happens over Slack.
I think the second part of that question is an interesting one
yeah.
too.
So can you make these feel lightweight, like lightweight check-ins, or are there only solely larger performance reviews? This is a great question. And I think the way people think about performance reviews, and we actually considered calling them something different in our product, is it always feels like a super heavyweight thing. We've designed the product so that you can do it. You can do the heavyweight thing once a year if you want, but if you want, we have some companies that run these weekly or monthly or quarterly. And the reason they do that is that they just keep it super simple, right? They just ask one or two questions. In some cases, it's closer to a talent review where just the manager is being asked to rate people, and then you do a lightweight calibration, right? It could just be as simple as that, maybe a little bit of text, sometimes a quick self-review. And I didn't show the self-review or the peer review flow, but we, of course, use AI to make those much easier. But we've built the product to be lightweight if you want it, right? And so if you just want managers to give a rating and then do a calibration and actually never share them, right? That's totally possible. And we can kind of spend that entire spectrum. I do recommend overall, especially right now when stuff is moving so quickly, is to do this more often, right? And whether it's a performance review or one-on-one like or pulses, you need to be staying on top of this stuff on like you wait 6 months to see how is AI adoption going. That's going to fail completely. You need to be doing this stuff on like weekly or monthly or quarterly basis. The way we do it at Windmill is every single week we have pulses. Every single week we have one-on-ones, and then we're doing a lightweight perf review every quarter. That's what we've kind of set up. Every company is different, so you have to figure out what works the best, but keep it lightweight. All right. There's a question about how does Windmill account for folks that are on leave? Would their performance review simply not be done? Especially for calibrations, it'd be good to see where the person on leave measures up. Yeah, so this is kind of like the question around if someone's on leave, medical reasons or whatever it is, and you're looking at things like stats or you're looking at other things that could be show you kind of the wrong picture. And so this is definitely an example where our system does honestly an okay job at this. We do pull in out of office from Google Calendar and from the HR system. So we have that data. Sometimes people aren't great at putting this information everywhere. And so this is definitely one of the things that comes up when you talk about why AI should not just be fully making decisions. I've seen some really bad things happen because you don't account for stuff like this. And so our system does an okay job. If you do put stuff in the HR system or in the calendar, it will pull it in. But it's hard. It's hard to look at things like stats, especially if someone was on leave, but kind of working, right? It's hard to kind of measure all that stuff. And so that's an area where I think you would ultimately need managers to be deciding all these kind of things. Um, there's a question around, do you think there is value in removing rating scale completely and just focusing on the improvement needs? Um, It depends. I think for things like surveys, or we call them pulses, I think ratings are way overblown. And everyone wants to show the graph, so they want to get the ratings. The issue is that like every time I've done it, I always usually the final question is like, is there anything else you want me to know? And that's where the value is. And you get all these numbers and like you change questions over time and you see graphs. And there are cases it is useful, but I find one open-ended question, especially like you saw how our system makes it conversational in Slack. People kind of open up a lot more if you just kind of turn into a conversation versus being like, here's the form. And I find that a lot more valuable. And you got to balance people's time with the value. And I find the most valuable thing is just asking an open-ended question. Um, Also, if you're at like if you have like 1,000 employees, an open-ended question used to be kind of annoying. Now it's obviously AI makes it trivial. So that has changed over the last few years. Then even if you do ratings questions, especially in like a pulse, people just often pick random numbers, so I don't know how much you can trust it. I do think for performance views, there is a place for one or two ratings numbers. It helps a lot with calibration. So I would keep them on performance views, but you don't have to. Um, so some questions about integrations. So yeah, I didn't dive into it, but a lot of what we're able to do is because of our integrations. This is actually the first thing we built. Um, because this is the thing that was so frustrating to me when I was going through my performance review processes. Hey, how does it not know what I did this year? I like everything I did was like in GitHub. So that's what we do. We integrate with every single productivity tool you want to use. We're always constantly adding integrations. We also integrate with go-to-market tools, meetings, communication, that kind of stuff. Your org chart yourself, we pull in from the HR, and all these different areas, right? So that's one of the first things you're going to do on setup. There was a question around, do you need to set up all the integrations, right? And the answer is no. We need Slack so our agent can talk to the team. Outside of that, there's not really required integrations. The more context, the better. But each company is different. And some people often want to start with a few integrations and see how it goes. And then what they usually end up doing is adding more integrations later on. If there isn't context from the system, you're going to fall back to an experience that looks probably pretty similar to what your experience is today, right? Where you're starting with more of a blank form because there's just no context. So it's not like it doesn't work. It's just you're going to lose some of the value, but it's not all or nothing. And then inside of these integrations, there's a lot of controls, right? So in Slack, you can choose which channels actually get indexed within Google. You can choose which files and all sorts of different pieces like that.
Yeah, and the one thing
Uh,
I'd add there is
yeah.
that we see that people still find value just because of the format of the performance review, that you can run it in Slack, which tends to be a lot more user-friendly of an experience for employees to complete their own self-reviews. So there are benefits to the medium in which you're completing performance reviews with Windmill as well.
Yep. There's another question about this where what if there's a Slack conversation that HR is not supposed to be seeing? Um, and that's obviously would be an issue. The way we solve that is twofold. One is that, as I mentioned, you can choose which Slack channels it's in. But the more important thing is that everything in our system mirrors the native permissions in the source system. So if there's a Slack conversation happening in a private channel that you're not in, you can't like see it in Windmill, even if you're their manager, even if you're the CEO. We think it's really important to preserve those native permissions. What we do is replicate what a person could do by just going into Slack, going into Google Docs, and just reading everything, right? So you don't get access to new information. We're just able to ingest it at scale that previously was just impossible. So there's not really a risk of sensitive data leaking to someone else. And that's where, as you think about how do you build a system to collect this context, that's obviously why a lot of people find Windmill helpful is that we've already thought through all those little details. A question about, have we heard any concerns about privacy concerns from employees about scraping data from Slack? This is usually something that comes up in like early on from someone like talking to like an HR person, and then we explain how the system works and we explain how it works to employees, and the concerns kind of fall away. Because as I said, we're not giving people access to data they otherwise wouldn't have, right? It's the same as a manager going into Slack and reading conversations, which most managers do today. It just makes it a lot less tedious. And on the flip side, the value you get out of this, like especially, I didn't show the self-review flow, but for individuals, one of the biggest selling points is now you're going to get credit for all the work that you do that otherwise gets lost, right? A lot of individuals keep these like brag docs, these manual things, because they want to make sure I get credit for this work because no one else is looking at it. Our system does that automatically. Can the tool work for your organization doesn't use Slack? Right now, we are Slack only, but definitely reach out if we're going to be adding Microsoft Teams support and Google Chat support. So if you use those platforms, definitely let us know. What other questions do we have? I'll turn it over quickly to Nicole. I will keep going through questions, but I just wanted to quickly wrap up here. I know we're at time here, so I'll let Nicole wrap up, and then I will keep answering questions.
Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. A little bit about next steps and what you can expect after this webinar. We're going to be sending over, I saw a couple questions in the chat, the webinar recording. This was recorded. We'll send it out to you after that, along with the white paper that Max mentioned about measuring and driving AI adoption. If people are interested, we'll also share a calendar link to book a demo and learn a bit more about Windmill. I saw there were still some unanswered questions in the chat that we'd love to get to. And if you found this webinar valuable, we'd love for you to share about it. If you learned something interesting and you want to post about it on LinkedIn or Twitter, post about it, tag us. We'll make sure to engage and share that. And we'll send along some notes after this as well that will help with any kind of post that you want to put together.
Super important. Whoever posts on LinkedIn or X and gets the most amount of engagement, we are going to send some swag to. So if you found anything useful, post about whatever you found useful, and whoever tops the leaderboard, we will send some swag to. We got some more questions here. I'll just keep going. This is Jennifer Baker sent this in, which I'm going to call this up. It's pretty cool. So we're in the middle of a year-end performance reviews, and as a director of learning, I created a job aid for using Copilot to strengthen your self-review, showing how to use a framework, goal, raw data output to work through the self-review process, intern manager evaluation. It was one of the most popular resources we've launched because it met the employee where they were. Yeah, this is awesome. AI is really good at coaching and helping you improve reviews. And this is where our agent, Wendy, we kind of have this built into the agent itself so that when people are going through the self-review process, Wendy's coaching them along the way to kind of strengthen that up as well. But it's a really good practice. You should definitely be using AI to help the actual writing itself, right? So AI is really good at pulling the context and reading stuff, but it's also really good at helping you write and strengthen stuff up. Let's see what else. Let's see. Some of these were just from the earlier on. There's a question, what type of controls does HR have over Windy and how often does Windy check in? So you have full control over when and how often Windy's going to reach out. There's a few different ways you can control it. So the times that Windy will reach out are before one-on-ones, pulses, performance reviews, and then continuous feedback. Those are the times when Windy reach out. All of those are configurable. You could turn them all on. You could turn them all off. When you're setting up a pulse like this, where Windy's reaching out about this AI eng workflows, we have really complex scheduling, which is really helpful. So I can make it one time. I can make it recurring. I could actually have it follow a calendar event. People use this for like ahead of meetings. They want to use Windy to kind of help them prepare. And we can choose every other week or anything like that. So you're in full control of when these get sent out. For one-on-ones, they get sent out a day in advance, but you can turn that off if you don't find it helpful as well. And we definitely recommend it's definitely a big mistake, and this is not a Windmill specific thing, but if you're running a survey that no one's responding to, or you're not getting value out of it from the person who's running the survey or the pulse or whatever you want to call it, you should turn that off. right? That's not helpful to anyone. Yes. Okay. Good question here. So does your product do after cycle analysis to call out team themes, identify strengths and gaps for each manager, give senior leaders summaries of how their teams are performed? Yeah, we do this. It's really cool. I'm not going to go through it right now. Definitely, if you're interested, sign up for a demo on our website and we will give you a full review of how it works. But we do a few different things. We do like a basic data analysis around things you'd expect around like curves and how people are fitting on the curve and stuff like that, which I would say has been around for quite some time. The more exciting thing that we also do is more of a textual analysis where we actually look at the performance reviews themselves and start to understand it on two levels. One is like the quality of the reviews and the quality of feedback and stuff like that. But then two, you can also learn a lot about an organization from these performance reviews that are sometimes not specific to individuals, right? So if you see across a team common areas that they need to develop on, right? That's an area for like learning and development to get involved and like help out across the company. So that's just one example. There's a lot of really interesting things you could do, and we can definitely go deeper on a demo there to talk through all those. From your experience implementations, what has been the tone from employees, specifically around skepticism with security? Security is really important. We've spent a lot of time on getting it right, and it's both security of our system, but it's also the permissioning structure. And this is where, yes, if it would be very bad, and I would never recommend building a system where it allows, like, for example, managers to read private messages they shouldn't have access to. That is a terrible way, and that will completely erode trust in this across the company. And so you need to architect in this the right way, and you need to be careful. I would say if you set it up in the right way, employees understand it, and they also see the opportunity and the value they get out of it, right? It's not like they're not getting anything out of it. Even an individual, when it comes to self-review or the quality of the review they're getting, everything just works a lot better. So you need to have the security and the permissioning set up correctly. That is really critical, and you need to not invade privacy. One thing some other companies do. We don't do this at all, but you can think about things like screen recording or like monitoring mouse movements, all sorts of crazy spyware stuff like that people do. We have specifically from day one said that is something we never want to do. We never want to invade privacy. And you don't need to, right? And so I think it is a pretty reasonable ground where if your manager could manually go in and see the documents you're working on, right? They could go see Figma, they could go into Slack. That seems like fair game for a system to be able to read on, but you got to preserve those permissions. And so far, working with employees, everyone's kind of agreed with that. That is a fair boundary. Um, what would you say the biggest mistake companies make when implementing AI and performance views? Probably the biggest mistake. I'd say there's two mistakes. One is thinking AI can do everything and it's amazing and it's just going to do the entire thing and it's going to write the performance views. And then the opposite is actually where people are so anti-AI for whatever reason and say this cannot possibly be used or be helpful for this process. And every single time we've seen it is helpful, right? Maybe you don't want AI to write the review. Maybe you want to write it completely manual. That's fine. AI can still be helpful, just helping you remember every little detail. And so I think the either extreme, I think, is a big risk. You got to find the right workflows. And this is where we've spent a lot of time. How do you combine AI with a manager in the loop to drive ideal outcomes? Um, let's see. Yeah, so there's a question around calibration. What happens if reviews happen in 3 to 4 different levels? Yeah, you can pretty easily set that up in our system. You can just have multiple calibrations that happen on a different, like 1 week you do a lower level and then they completely ladder up. They're completely flexible. So you're able to do that on our platform. All right. I think we got through all the questions. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you, especially anyone who's still with us. We got 45 people still here, which is awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll follow up with an email with next steps, any of these resources. Please reach out to me. You can respond to the email. You can find me on X or on LinkedIn or Nicole. Tell us what you liked, and more importantly, tell us what you didn't like. If you found this useful, we'll definitely run more of these in the future. So thank you all for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.